The Jets have had a big offseason. Has it been enough to get general manager Joe Douglas off the hot seat? I have some thoughts on that, and I'll tell you what they are today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Wednesday, April 10th, 2024, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thanking you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. Subscribe to the show for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you'll get new episodes as soon as they're posted. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, please give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150, win or lose. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Today we have our weekly mailbag show. Each Wednesday we try to do a mailbag with listener questions. Thanks so much to everybody who sent in questions. Our first question is about general manager Joe Douglas. John, I look at the offseason the Jets had. They added a lot of high-end players like Tyron Smith and Mike Williams. They also addressed the offensive line by adding Morgan Moses. Is it fair to say Joe Douglas is now off the hot seat, or should he be off the hot seat? Also, should he no longer be tied to Robert Saleh because the Jets have enough talent that if they lose, you could probably blame it on the coaching, not the general manager? So it's an interesting question. And I've been hearing this a lot in the fan base, this theory that now Joe Douglas has done his job, so now it's all on Saleh. Now the two of them should not be tied at the hip anymore, that if the Jets lose, it's really on Saleh. And I cannot really say I agree with it. And there are a number of reasons I can't say I agree with it. Number one is the Jets have not taken the field yet. We need to see how this team actually works out. I think that of the options that were in front of the Jets this offseason, they've made the ones that on paper made the most sense. Getting Tyron Smith with minimal guarantees, that's a very high upside move. Getting Mike Williams without a ton of guarantees, that's, again, a high upside move. Trading for Morgan Moses, who's on a cheap deal, who, did not cost a lot in terms of trade compensation. That's a solid move on paper. But, we've been here before with Joe Douglas. We've been here with the Jets winning the offseason. We've been here over and over where the Jets have been the team that gets the offseason hype. And it's one thing to make a bunch of moves, but this team has never played together. And look, the team does have pretty high upside, which has not been true all that frequently in the past. If everything clicks, if Rodgers comes back and is close to the player he used to be, and if Tyron Smith can stay healthy for most of the season and maintain his level of play, if Morgan Moses can, avoid a decline in his mid-30s, if Mike Williams bounces back and is good, if the Jets have better injury luck, especially on the offensive line, if the defense does not decline, there's a lot of ifs there. And this team has not played together. This is not Kansas City where they've won 3 Super Bowls in the last 5 years. It's not Cincinnati where this group has been to a Super Bowl. It's not Buffalo where maybe they haven't been to a Super Bowl, but it's a team that's won the division every year since 2020. It's not even Baltimore, a team that played really great football for most of last season up to the AFC Championship game. It's a team that could, if everything clicks, be in that class. But we've seen this over and over. Games are not played on paper. So we need to see how it plays out, because we've seen plenty of Jets off seasons in the past where they make moves that were very flashy, moves that look great on paper. And you don't really know how it's going to work out till they hit the field in September. And we'll see how the team meshes, and we'll see whether the guys stay healthy. But taking a look at this bigger picture, you never judge a general manager, or you at least never should judge a general manager based on like a very limited set of time. I don't think you should ever judge a general manager based on a 1-year window. And why do I say that? Well, let me give you, there are plenty of reasons I can say that, but the one example really stands out in my head. Do you know who the NFL Executive of the Year was in 2015? You probably do. It was Mike Maccagnan, who went 10-6, who built a team that went 10-6 his first year, and the team fell apart, and Maccagnan was never able to recapture that magic with the Jets. It's one thing to say you built a team that looks good on paper for 1 year, but general managers, for me at least, are judged on the longer term horizon. Joe Douglas has been here since 2019. Now, that first year wasn't really his team. So let's say that he's really been here 4 years. The Jets have never won more than 7 games in Joe Douglas's tenure. So the idea that like GM who's never built, and even if you put 2019 on his record, they won 7 games that year. So you're talking about a GM who's never built a team that's won more than 7 games. And if you want to blame Saleh, if you want to say the coaching staff's been awful, well, Douglas was the guy who hired Saleh. He was given the authority by Chris Johnson. This was still the point where Woody Johnson was the ambassador to the UK. Saleh is Douglas's guy. So I don't understand the idea that a GM who has been here since 2019 has never built a winning team, suddenly now off the hot seat is now not responsible for the team's performance. And taking it a step further, I mean, has Douglas satisfied you that he's built this team to last for the long run? I think in some areas he has. I think the future of the corner position looks very good with Sauce Gardner, and hopefully we get news about some sort of extension about Michael Carter II after the draft. I'm hoping that happens. He's now eligible for an extension. Very logical move I think the Jets can make. Be proactive. I think the defensive line, looks pretty good. Quinnen Williams was not drafted by Joe Douglas. He was drafted by McCagnon, but Douglas did lock him up for the long run. If you look the defensive end position, you have Jermaine Johnson, who was a Pro Bowler this past season. On the offensive side of the ball, though, there's no quarterback in the future. Aaron Rodgers is 40. Jets still don't have an answer at quarterback. There's no answer at this point at the tackle position. And at wide receiver, there's only Garrett Wilson, which was a good pick. So, has Joe Douglas built a team that you think can compete for the long run? I mean, not yet. And, look, this year, I think this year's a really important year for Joe Douglas because there's not a lot. I mean, yeah, he's done a good job on the defensive side of the ball, but that's half the team. It's really less than half the team because, as you know, I'm a big special teams fan. Douglas you need to get results in this league. Winning the offseason is not enough to get you off the hot seat when you haven't made the playoffs in 4 years. We need to see, I think we need to see big results, especially when you consider how much the Jets have pushed to the here and now. They've borrowed resources from their future to try and win big now. So if you don't win big now, I don't see how you can possibly look at this GM and say, no, it's okay, good enough. Because the Jets do face challenges. They're going to face big challenges after the season. And the question is not so much, what the team looks like now. The question is, will you trust the general manager who's in place to deal with the challenges in 2025 and beyond? Is this the right guy for that job? And I think that question at this point is not answered. And, I don't think you can, or at least what I'd say is, I don't think you can answer that in the affirmative at this point. The Jets make a big run this year. If they go to the Super Bowl, you can say, okay, you know what? This guy built a team that went to the Super Bowl. Maybe I trust him to deal with these challenges. These challenges are not necessarily something that, doom the Jets. It's going to require good work. It's going to require the front office to be nimble. It's going to require the front office to take advantage of opportunities. But right now, I mean, again, it's not just the record. And people say you can't judge a GM based on his record. That may be true the first couple of years. It may be true the first year or two. But we're deep enough into Douglas's tenure that the record is very relevant because this is the results of the team he built. But again, if you want to blame it on coaching, well, he hired the coach. And the two most important moves any general manager is going to make are hiring the head coach and finding the quarterback. And Douglas's handpicked head coach has not done the job yet. And again, if you're going to say he's a bad coach, well, who hired him? Douglas's handpicked quarterback, it wasn't Aaron Rodgers, it was Zach Wilson. And Zach Wilson has failed. So if we're talking about the important decisions, Douglas doesn't have much to hang his hat on there. I think at this point, he's going to be around this year. The Jets are not going to do what they did with McCagnon and fire him immediately after the draft. Douglas is going to have an opportunity to show he built a great team this year. But I think we need to see results before we start proclaiming Douglas the GM of the next decade for the Jets. Can we get one winning season? Can we go on one run before we do that? I don't think that's a lot to ask. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we're going to start comparing some of the prospects who could be available for the New York Jets at 10. The two big positions are wide receiver and offensive tackle. I'll give you some thoughts on those prospects as we continue on this Wednesday mailbag edition of Locked On Jets. This episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by FanDuel. It's playoff time in the NBA and NHL. Baseball's in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. And right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. Again, that's $150, win or lose. Baseball is underway this season. Yankees off to a great start. If you're a baseball fan in New York and you're a Yankee fan, you got to be happy. If you're a Met fan, well, you can't be all that thrilled, but you can still make it up on FanDuel. And again, the playoffs are approaching between the NBA and the NHL. You can bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. What are you waiting for? Visit fanduel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. Again, it's fanduel.com/lockedon. All the New York sports action, all the action in the NHL, the NBA, and Major League Baseball on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. A big shout out to you every dayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets. We have new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. And then after you're done watching or listening to Locked On Jets, head on over to Locked On Sports Today. You might be watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day. You may have to turn down the volume with all that shouting. Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you the can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today on Locked On Jets, we continue with our weekly mailbag. Our next question, John, which wide receiver do you want the Jets to draft at 10 if they go wide receiver? So I'm assuming Marvin Harrison Jr. is off the table. I mean, I think he would be the answer, but I just think it's so unlikely that he falls to 10. And granted, the caveats there that every year something that nobody expects to happen in the draft ends up happening. Harrison's the guy, I think, if he's available. But I think really the options, the guys who could fall to 10, and I think it's unlikely either of them fall, are Malik Neighbors and Rome Odunze. Neighbors is from LSU. Odunze is from Washington. And I go back and forth on these two guys, and they're different styles of receiver. And that's one of the interesting things about the wide receiver position is that players just have there are players with all sorts of styles. Guys win in all different sorts of ways at the wide receiver position. And I think maybe I'm being too broad when I categorize them this way, but Neighbors is more of the speed guy, whereas Dunze is more of a possession receiver. And I don't think that's even fair because that gives you the idea that Odunze is just like this really slow plodding guy, which he's not. I don't think he has like the top end speed of Neighbors. I think Neighbors is like a big play waiting to happen. So for this Jets offense, I go back and forth. I could change my mind if you ask me again tomorrow. I might lean towards Neighbors, although it seems like there's a lot of buzz building towards him. And one of the weird things with Neighbors, though, is that I keep hearing about people saying he's undersized, about how you have to have an offensive coordinator who knows how to utilize him. He's like one of those guys who has to be used a certain way. I don't know that that's necessarily true. I mean, he's bigger than Garrett Wilson. I mean, he's measured a little bit bigger than Garrett Wilson. And I mean, Garrett Wilson's a little undersized, but it's not like Garrett Wilson's tiny at the wide receiver position. Neighbors is a little bit bigger than him. It's not like, I mean, I think the idea that Neighbors is like this really, really tiny receiver who can't handle himself on the outside or needs to be schemed touches. I don't think that's necessarily true. Now, I think you can scheme him touches because I think he's a big play waiting to happen. I think for the personnel on the Jets offense, I mean, I think one thing they could use is kind of like a home run threat. They have Breece Hall, who's a home run threat. I don't know that they have another home run threat on offense, at least it's as far as speed goes. I think Mike Williams is a good deep threat. A guy who you can throw the ball down the field to, but I don't think he's a guy who's a threat to take it to the house on every play. I don't think Garrett really is either. I don't think that's really his game. Garrett, will make his money dominating in the short and intermediate areas of the field, running great routes, shaking defenders. So I might go with Neighbors, although Odunze is a really good player. Odunze, I think, is going to be a heck of a player. And he's bigger. He's definitely a bigger type of receiver. He measures around 6'3" or so, in the 210 plus pound range. So he brings a lot to the table. And I think Odunze is also kind of tough to bring down after the catch. I think he's a really tough receiver. I think the only thing Odunze doesn't have is like that blazing speed, but he's got almost everything else. It's not like he's slow. That's not a guy who's super slow. I think each of these receivers has like this misconception about them. For Neighbors, it's that he's really small, and for Odunze, it's that he's super slow. And I don't think it's true in either case. Now, Neighbors may not be the biggest receiver. He's not a Odunze size, and Odunze doesn't have Neighbors caliber speed. And maybe that's the reason, maybe we're comparing these guys to each other so much that we're coming up with this idea. But, I don't think it's necessarily, I think both of these guys are better rounded than people give them credit for. I'd be happy with either. If you're asking me, though, since the question asked, which do I prefer? I'd go with Neighbors now. I don't have a ton of conviction with that. Ask me again tomorrow. Ask me on next week's mailbag, and I might have a different answer for you. Next question, John, would you prefer Fashanu or Fuaga if the Jets take tackle at 10? And it's kind of like it's very similar setup to the last question, because Joe Alt would be the guy. Joe Alt is the Marvin Harrison Jr. of this question, because if Joe Alt falls to 10, that's my guy. In fact, if we're talking about the Jets trading up, and I do not like the idea of the Jets trading up, I do not like the idea of the Jets giving up more picks. But if the Jets have to trade up, if like my only option is trading, it's not. But if you're telling me that I have to accept a trade up, Alt would be the guy it would be for. It's interesting because in some ways, like I think you can make an argument Fuaga has a higher ceiling and a lower floor because he's got so much power to his game that if he clicks as a tackle, he's going to be really, really good. I mean, he could be a top-notch tackle. The questions with him are, can he hold up a tackle or do you have to slide him into guard? But his ability to slide into guard also, I think, maybe gives him a higher floor than Fashanu. Because, if it doesn't work at tackle, he plays with so much power. And at the guard position, playing with power is really important because you're up against guys. You're against the guards. You kind of move to you're lined up against the defensive tackles. You're lined up against 280, 290, 300-pound guys. So if you play with power, you'll be fine. So in a way, like I feel like Fuaga is a safe pick. But there's part of me that really likes Fashanu, and I think like his movement skills are just top notch. And maybe he doesn't play with the same power as Fuaga. And I know there is some concern about his strength and his ability to maybe add strength based on his frame. But he just moves so well. He's so it's so beautiful to watch. I mean, I don't know if you could ever say like watching an offensive lineman operate is beautiful, but he's just like, I mean, the way he moves. And at the tackle position, that's critical because at the tackle position, it's pretty much the opposite of what I told you at guard. At guard, there's a lot of power because you're lined up against the elite defensive tackles, the big 300-pound guys. At tackle, you're lined up against the edge rusher. You're lined up against explosive athletes. So you got to be able to move. And the other thing you got to remember at tackle is that you don't have any help on the outside. At guard, you have help to either side of you. At guard, on one side, you have the center. The other side, you have the tackle. So if somebody, if you get beat at one of those spots, you have somebody to your side who can help you out. At the tackle position, you only have help to one side. You have help on the inside to the guard, but you have nobody helping you on the outside unless, you leave a tight end in or something like that, or you chip a guy. But many cases, you're going to have to hold up on an island one-on-one against someone of the most explosive pass rushers in the league. And that guy's going to be running at you. Like sometimes he runs at you at a really wide angle. So you have to be able to get out quickly and still maintain leverage. It's not just getting out there. It's getting out quickly enough where you can set your base and you can make contact with a guy without leaning, because when you lean, that's when you get into trouble, because especially in the NFL, you need a good center of balance. Otherwise, guys will be able to knock you around. And I don't know that Fashanu is going to be this top caliber of player, but I think about D'Brickashaw Ferguson a lot with him, because I don't know that Fashanu necessarily has the ceiling of a Joe Alt or a Fuaga, but Jets drafted D'Brickashaw 4th overall in 2006. And D'Brickashaw was never the best left tackle in the NFL. He was never an all-pro. He had a couple years where he was a Pro Bowler, but for the most part, he was never like a top 3. There were a couple years, maybe 2008 through 2010, he was you could argue he was a top 3 tackle. But he was just really solid. He was an above-average left tackle. And an above-average left tackle has so much value in the NFL. And I'm almost of the mindset that an above-average left tackle is a tremendous outcome. Because I think about you think about it in practice. The Jets got a guy who was not a top left tackle in 2006 in the top 5. He was never the best left tackle in the NFL. It was a great pick. They didn't have to worry about left tackle for a decade. And I don't want to put those expectations on Fashanu, but sometimes we overestimate how good a guy has to be for him to work out. A left tackle does not have to be a superstar in the top 10 to work out, because it just locks down a premium position for a decade. You don't have to worry about it. So I actually might lean toward Fashanu just because I think he's going to be able to play left tackle. I don't think Fuaga is. I think Fuaga probably sticks at right tackle. That's probably where I don't think he's quite athletic enough to play the left tackle position. I think you have to be a little more athletic at left tackle because you're blocking the guy the quarterback can't see, so he's not going to really be able to step up. So you have to be like a superior pass protector on the left side. So I'd probably lean towards Fashanu for that reason, because of his ability to play left tackle. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll turn our attention to the later rounds of the draft. There's plenty of buzz that the Jets are going to be looking to draft a quarterback on day 3. Are there any good ones available? I'm not so sure, but I'll explain that in more detail as we continue here on this Wednesday mailbag edition of the Locked On Jets podcast. This is the Locked On Jets podcast. On this Wednesday, we're doing our weekly mailbag show. Our next question: are there any late round quarterbacks that you find interesting? So there's a lot of buzz that the Jets are going to draft a quarterback on day 3. And one thing I want to emphasize that if the Jets draft a quarterback on day 3, please do not say he's the heir apparent to Aaron Rodgers. You don't draft a quarterback on day 3 to be the heir apparent to your starting quarterback. It's one of those situations where you like his tools. We'll see what we can do with him. Maybe he's a long-term backup. If we really strike gold, maybe he can be maybe he can develop into a starter. But that's not our plan A. We're not building our future around a quarterback who's drafted on day 3. So there have been a couple names linked to the Jets. One of those, Michael Pratt out of Tulane. I got to be honest, I'm not a huge fan. I've only watched a little bit of most of these guys. So, I'll probably dive in deeper the closer we get to the draft. I know it's only a couple of weeks away. So I'll probably look at these guys in more detail, especially with the rumors surrounding these guys. I was not super impressed by what I saw from Michael Pratt out of Tulane. I was not super impressed by what I saw out of Spencer Rattler out of South Carolina. Before then, he was at Oklahoma and he was benched for Caleb Williams. That's actually how Caleb Williams got his start. Spencer Rattler was benched for him, and Rattler transferred to South Carolina. Finished his career on a higher note, but I didn't love him. And I think part of this is now there's all this talk like who's going to be the Brock Purdy of this draft. There's not a Brock Purdy every year. I think that's the wrong question to ask because Brock Purdy's don't come around every day. There are lots of busts who are drafted in round 1, round 2, round 3, but most of the good quarterbacks go in the first couple of rounds, and that's one of the things that I think people don't appreciate in the NFL. The scouting departments miss on a lot of guys, but they tend to be able to weed out the guys who really can't play. It's very rare to find a hit, especially at the quarterback position on round 4, especially round 5, round 6, round 7. They do happen occasionally, and Purdy's a perfect example of that. But generally speaking, yeah, they may not get every first rounder right, but most of the guys who are good go in the first round. And of the guys who don't go in the first round who are good, most of them go in the second round, and so on. And if anybody falls out of the first and second rounds and he ends up being good, odds are he went in the third round. Occasionally there's a guy like a Brock Purdy who falls all the way to round 7 and is the Mr. Irrelevant pick, but it's not that easy to find. And I don't think you can ever count on finding that. Now, when we're talking late round picks, the odds are not good of hitting anyway. So, I understand the mindset of it. And if you do strike gold, and it's a low cost gamble. It's like a lottery ticket. If you do strike gold, if you even find a guy who's a good backup, that's a great pick. So it's certainly worth doing. I have no objection to the Jets drafting somebody on day 3, but I just don't know that there's going to be a great player available to them. And anybody who's being drafted on day 3, they probably have flaws to their game and they need to be developed. And, I hate to talk in these terms, but if a quarterback needs to be developed, we're almost talking about a guy who's going to waste his rookie year with Nathaniel Hackett around. And we might as well just draft a guy and fast forward to year 2 for them because we know Hackett's not going to do much to develop them. So we'll see what happens. I don't think anybody they draft is going to be very relevant in year 1. And hopefully you find somebody who has the tools, who you get a better coach in here. Maybe they can be a player for you even as a backup moving forward. Next question. With all the justifiable concerns about older player signings being injury risks, I would be interested to know what percentage of rookies suffer season-ending injuries. I wonder if the increased demands that moving from college to the professional ranks provides puts stress on their younger bodies and leads to a higher percentage of season-ending injuries. So this was an interesting question, and I did not have an answer right off the bat. So I tried to search as best I could, and I found an article that cited a study by Football Outsiders, the old website that is no more. So the website's gone, so I couldn't look at the actual website, but it was actually interesting, and it did find that rookies do suffer more injuries than any other position. And it didn't have numbers on season-ending injuries, but it definitely, the longer you're in the NFL, year 2, you had guys suffer less injuries than year 1. Year 3, they suffered less injuries than year 2. So there probably is something to that. There's definitely something about being more physical, but I think this is just a theory. This is just me guessing, but I'd also imagine there's something to the idea that maybe you have a better idea how to prepare your body for the longer season once you're in the league for a year or 2. So it did seem like there is some sort of connection of, there's not like a ton of stuff. There's not a ton of research that's been done on this, but to the extent there's been limited research, it does appear that there's at least some correlation between younger guys who are just entering the league getting injured a little bit more. And again, I think it's difficult to say exactly what it is. I think, part of it might just be the longer season. Guys aren't used to that, but a lot of it, I think, goes to just the preparation where, once you've been, I think it's true in any job. I mean, I think all of us understand how to prepare for our job better in year 2 than we do in year 1. That's true pretty much any field you're in, whether you're an NFL player, whether you're doing anything else, whether you're doing a football podcast, whether you're doing whatever you do for a living. I think that that's generally true. And it seems like, to answer your question, to the extent I could find any sort of answer, it does seem like rookies do suffer injuries at a higher rate. At least that was it was a Football Outsider study from a few years ago. That's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoyed the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and you're listening on a podcast source, please give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out and helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your Wednesday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow to talk more Jets.